I'll be blunt with you before we begin. As someone working in the health and neuroscience fields, there's no way to drive away toxic people through arguments, explanations, or proofs. The human brain doesn't change because it's persuaded. It changes because it loses its reward. Toxic people don't exist because of reason. They exist because of the emotional energy you unknowingly provide them every day. And the most dangerous thing is, you often don't realize you're teaching them how to treat you, not with words, but with reactions. Every time you react too quickly, apologize unnecessarily, over-explain, try to maintain peace by swallowing your frustration, their brain learns a very clear lesson. They have the right to continue. But psychology also gives us a very different, very quiet, very powerful truth. When behavior is no longer fueled by reactions, it shuts down on its own. No fighting. No noisy interruptions. No declarations. You just need to change a few very small, subtle, but well-placed behaviors. In this video, I'll guide you through 5 such behaviors. Not to make you cold, not to make you manipulative, but to regain control of your nervous system so that toxic people, if they don't change, will leave on their own because there's nothing left to exploit. This is behavioral science, not empty philosophy. And if you understand it thoroughly, you won't need to fight toxic people anymore. You just need to stop feeding them. We start with a fundamental principle in psychology. People learn through consequences, not through promises, not through intentions, not through your desire for what's good. The brain learns through behaviors that are rewarded are repeated, behaviors that are not rewarded are weakened. For toxic people, the greatest reward isn't right or wrong. It's your emotional response. Your anger gives them a sense of power. Your confusion gives them a sense of control. Your explanations give them a sense of importance, and the fear of losing them gives them leverage. Therefore, the following 5 behaviors are not intended to deal with them, but to silently but precisely cut off their reward source. The first behavior, and the foundation of all the others, is to stop reacting immediately. When someone says something hurtful, sarcastic, crosses the line, or deliberately provokes you, the natural reflex of the nervous system is to react. Heart rate increases, facial muscles tense, voice changes. You want to retort, correct, defend yourself, clarify, but at that very moment you fall into the classic trap of emotional manipulation. In psychology, this phenomenon is called emotional baiting, luring emotional responses to elicit a reaction. Toxic people don't need you to agree with them. They just need you to be triggered. Because when you're activated, the brain's alarm center, the amygdala, takes control, while the prefrontal cortex, which processes reason and boundaries, temporarily weakens. In that state, you're more likely to say things you'll regret, more likely to give in, more likely to apologize unnecessarily, more likely to reveal your weaknesses. But just a tiny pause is all it takes for the situation to change. 3 seconds. No more. Those 3 seconds are your power window. When you pause, you give your nervous system a chance to break free from reflexes and return to a state of awareness. You can count in your head. 1, 2, 3. In those 3 seconds, you don't need to think of a clever answer. You just need not to react emotionally. And then when you respond with a neutral, non-defensive, non-explanatory, non-inviting response, I heard, yeah, okay, the other person's brain immediately encounters a problem. The reward they expect doesn't appear. No anger, no panic, there's no drama. And what's very interesting is, the toxic brain hates emotional emptiness. To them, your calmness isn't a strength, it's confusion. Because they don't know how to play the game. You don't need to win the conversation. You just need to keep your nervous system from being taken over. And when you do that enough times, their agitated behavior will start to decrease, because it's no longer effective. The second behavior is to stop over-explaining. This is one of the behaviors that many good, kind, conscientious people unknowingly fall into. You explain because you want to be understood. You explain because you're afraid of being misunderstood. You explain because you think if you explain clearly enough, at length enough, and sincerely enough, the other person will change. But from a psychological perspective, over-explaining often doesn't stem from clarity, but from a need for reassurance. It's called reassurances, seeking behavior. When you give lengthy explanations, you're implicitly telling the other person's brain, I need your agreement to feel okay. And when someone realizes you need that agreement, they gain more power. Toxic people are particularly sensitive to this. They'll keep asking questions, keep twisting things, keep pretending not to understand. Not because they truly don't understand, but because each time you explain, they gain more energy and status. The science of communication reveals something very simple, yet very difficult to practice. Confident people don't explain much. Not because they're arrogant, but because they have a solid inner point of reference. They know what they choose, and they don't need constant approval. When you start responding shorter, more decisively, without defensiveness, like, because I think that's appropriate, I've already decided, you're not closing the door to communication. you're closing the door to manipulation. People who respect you won't need further explanation. People who constantly demand explanations aren't seeking understanding, they're seeking control. And when you stop providing explanations, you stop asking permission to exist in your own way. The third behavior is creating consequences silently. This is where many people confuse kindness with tolerance. They think that if they continue to be tolerant, continue to let things slide, continue to understand the other person's circumstances, things will get better on their own. But the brain doesn't learn from abstract kindness. It learns from repetitive patterns. If someone treats you badly and no consequences occur, their brain registers that behavior as safe. Not because they are malicious, but because behavioral biology works that way. Therefore, you can't teach others respect by continuing to tolerate it. But creating consequences doesn't mean yelling, threatening, or cutting short the drama. In fact, the most effective consequences are often very quiet. You respond more slowly, you are less proactive, you are no longer immediately available. You say, "I'm busy," without further explanation. You stop over-investing in people who invest very little. In psychology, this is called natural consequences. You don't punish, you simply withdraw the reward. And when the reward of attention, availability, unconditional support disappears, the other person's brain is forced to adjust. Someone who truly values you will notice the change and adjust their behavior. Someone who only exploits you will eventually get bored and leave. And importantly, you don't need to explain why you're backing down. Absence is incredibly teaching, more powerful than any lecture. The fourth behavior is to stop fearing rejection. The fear of being disliked, abandoned, or misunderstood is one of the biggest weaknesses that toxic people exploit. When you fear losing someone, you're more likely to compromise. You're more likely to stay silent when you shouldn't be. You're more likely to nod when you disagree. But attachment science shows a paradox. The more you fear rejection, the more likely you are to be treated badly. Because you're signaling that your boundaries are negotiable. People with high emotional self-esteem aren't people everyone likes. They accept the possibility of being misunderstood. They know that not every relationship is designed to last. And they understand that trying to hold on to people who don't respect you can cause far more harm than letting them go. When you truly accept that some people won't like you, you regain a tremendous amount of freedom. You no longer have to pretend. You no longer have to please. You no longer have to constantly explain yourself. And interestingly, when you're no longer afraid of rejection, people start to respect you more. Not because you change them, but because you no longer need their validation. Respect always comes at a price. Often it's popularity, but it's a worthwhile price for peace. The fifth behavior, and the one that connects all of the above, is to stop chasing others. In many toxic relationships, there's a very clear pattern. One person is always proactive, always texting first, always planning, always trying to keep the connection alive. The other responds indifferently. Sometimes there, sometimes not. The proactive person often calls it loyalty, but from a mental health perspective, it's often self-neglect. Healthy relationships have a back-and-forth rhythm. It's not about being a savior or being saved. When you're constantly chasing, you teach others that your presence is taken for granted, and taken for granted is rarely appreciated. When you stop, not to test anyone, not to play mind games, but to return to your own life, something very clear happens. The real people will come. Those who stay only for convenience will fade away. And that's not a loss. It's natural selection. Behavioral science shows that peace attracts healthy relationships far better than craving. When you stop trying to prove your worth, you start attracting people who saw it from the start. When you combine these 5 behaviors, something very interesting happens. You no longer have to deal with toxic people. You don't need to name them. You don't need to argue about right and wrong. You simply change how your nervous system reacts, how you allocate energy, and how you set boundaries through behavior. And then the toxic person faces a choice. Either they adjust to your new norms, or they leave because they no longer receive the reward. No drama, no pronouncements, just a very quiet disappearance. Your peace becomes a barrier, your silence becomes your boundary, and your steadfastness becomes your power. This isn't the quickest way, but it's the most sustainable. And when you understand this, you will no longer live in a state of defense, but begin to live in a state of self-mastery where no one needs to disappear, but only the right people can remain.